In the heart of the storm-battered town of Frost Hollow, Deputy Cole Merritt discovers something that will change his life forever. Amidst the relentless blizzard, a German shepherd half buried in the snow lies with a tiny puppy curled beneath its protective body. The storm rages, but the bond between man and animal begins to grow, uncovering more than just survival. As Cole looks into the amber eyes of the dog, he senses a deep story of sacrifice and loyalty that transcends the harshest of winters. What is the true story behind these two survivors? Watch now to witness a tale of love, resilience, and an unbreakable bond. The night in Frost Hollow, Montana, was swallowed by a relentless blizzard, the kind that made the whole world seem like it was wrapped in a thick blanket of white. It was the kind of storm that could make even the most familiar roads feel like a foreign wasteland. Deputy Cole Merritt had seen his fair share of storms, but tonight felt different. The snow fell in dense sheets, the wind howling through the empty streets like a ghost in a forgotten town. The temperature had dropped below zero, and the wind was sharp, biting at any exposed skin. Frost Hollow was the kind of place where people rarely stayed for long. It was a quiet town, tucked away in the mountains, with a population too small to make an impact. The only time it got attention was during storms like this one. Tonight, though, it felt like the storm was more than just a weather pattern. It felt like a sign. Cole gripped the steering wheel of his patrol SUV, the headlights casting pale streaks across the darkened road ahead. His eyes scanned the frozen landscape, watching for any signs of trouble. The tires of his truck crunched over the ice-covered guardrails, and his mind wandered back to the radio that had crackled earlier, announcing the 3rd anniversary of Nora Merritt's death. The wife he lost in a tragic accident on this very road. The anniversary always hit him hard, but tonight it felt more like a ghost following him in the snow. As the snow swirled around him, Cole's thoughts were interrupted by something unusual. A flicker of movement appeared in his headlights, something dark against the pale backdrop of white. He squinted, tapping the brakes, slowing the SUV. His eyes narrowed, trying to make sense of the shape. It was half buried in the snow, its form barely visible. He pulled the vehicle to a stop. The red and blue lights of his patrol car blinked to life behind him, slicing through the blizzard. The storm seemed to quiet as he stepped out, the cold biting at his face. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he walked toward the strange sight. There, under a mound of snow, was a German shepherd lying still in the snow. Its fur was frozen stiff with ice, and its body was curled protectively over something smaller. His breath fogged in the air as he crouched down. The wind stung his eyes, but he could see the faint rise and fall of the dog's chest. "Easy, boy," Cole murmured softly, his voice barely audible against the roar of the wind. He brushed the snow away gently, revealing a tiny puppy, no more than 6 weeks old, trembling beneath the larger dog. The puppy's fur was streaked with snowflakes, its small body shivering violently. The German shepherd's amber eyes opened deep and tired, but there was something in them. Something that told Cole this dog had fought not just for survival, but for a cause greater than itself. The dog gave a low, ragged breath, as if saying, "I'm still here, but I can't go much further." Cole's heart tightened. The dog, battered and weak, still had the will to protect, and that was something he couldn't ignore. He quickly grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Deputy Merritt, Highway 287, near mile marker 14. I've got 2 canines, 1 adult, 1 juvenile. Both appear hypothermic. I'm bringing them in." He turned back toward the patrol car, feeling the wind cut through his jacket. He moved carefully, lifting the injured dog first and gently wrapping the puppy in an emergency blanket from his kit. With both animals in his arms, he walked toward the warmth of his SUV, the snow still whipping around him. But the bond between man and animal stronger than ever. The storm raged on, but as Cole settled the dogs into the car, a sense of quiet determination filled him. He wasn't just saving them from the storm. He was about to become part of their story. As he drove toward the sheriff's substation, the road ahead was still swallowed by the snowstorm. But Cole's focus had shifted from the blizzard to the two souls in his care. What had he just found, and what secrets lay beneath the scars of the German shepherd? The answer to those questions would come in time. For now, all Cole knew was that he had two lives in his hands, and he wasn't going to let them slip away. The storm outside seemed to grow stronger as Cole drove toward the sheriff's substation, the windshield wipers battling to keep up with the relentless snow. Inside the SUV, the only sounds were the low hum of the engine and the rhythmic breathing of the two dogs curled up in the back seat. Cole's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. But his mind drifted back to a time before the storm, before the snow had even begun to fall. It had been 3 years since Nora Merritt had died, but the memory still felt like a wound that never healed. He could still hear her laugh, echoing in the kitchen, feel her warmth beside him at the dinner table. Every year on the anniversary of her death, Cole tried to push the memories down, but they always resurfaced like snowflakes in a storm, relentless and cold. The accident had happened in a storm just like this. He had been on the same stretch of Highway 287, watching the snow swirl around him when the call came in. Nora's car had spun out of control in the blizzard, crashing into the guardrails before flipping over into the deep snow. The rescue teams had arrived too late. By the time Cole reached her, she was gone, her body trapped in the wreckage, the icy grip of the storm stealing her from him. Cole swallowed hard, his eyes stinging. He hadn't cried much since that night, but the pain was always there just beneath the surface. He focused on the road, trying to push the memories of Nora away. But the image of her face, her bright eyes and warm smile never quite left him. It was as if she was still out there, somewhere in the snow, waiting for him to come back and make things right. The deep breath he took brought him back to the present. But as he glanced in the rearview mirror at Atlas and Echo, his thoughts shifted. The German shepherd's amber eyes, though tired and worn, reflected a quiet strength, a strength that Cole recognized. This dog had been through something. Something hard, something that had left its mark just like him. Cole couldn't help but feel a strange connection with the animal. Both of them were survivors of a kind of storm that left scars deeper than the ones visible to the eye. As he pulled into the parking lot of the sheriff's substation, the snow was coming down harder. The world outside the car looking like a blur of white and gray. Cole stopped the SUV and sat there for a moment, his fingers still tight around the steering wheel. He turned to look at Atlas, who was resting on the back seat, the older dog's chest rising and falling faintly. Cole could see the faint outline of scars beneath the fur scars that told a story of survival, of pain, and of sacrifice. Echo, the tiny puppy, lay pressed close to Atlas, instinctively seeking the warmth and protection of the larger dog. Cole's eyes softened. "What happened to you, boy?" he whispered, mostly to himself. But Atlas only shifted slightly, his eyes flicking up to meet Cole's gaze, a silent acknowledgement that this was a moment between them. The storm outside raged, but inside the SUV, the warmth from the heater was beginning to sink into Cole's bones. He stepped out the cold air, hitting him immediately. But there was something different about this night. Something more than just the weather or the anniversary of Nora's death. Atlas had come into his life for a reason. And as Cole walked into the substation, he knew that he couldn't just leave the dog's past buried in the snow. There were secrets there hidden deep beneath the layers of scars. Secrets that needed to be uncovered. But for now, Cole needed to get Atlas and Echo inside safe and warm. The answers would come in time. As Cole entered the sheriff's substation, the warmth from the heater rushed over him. But his mind was still consumed with the two dogs in the back seat. The storm outside had only grown more intense, and the night was far from over. His gaze flicked over to Atlas, still lying motionless, his scars now more visible under the harsh light. Next to him, Echo remained close, the tiny puppy nestled against Atlas for comfort. He needed to get them inside and settled. But there was something nagging at him. Something about the dog's past that called out to him. It wasn't just the physical scars, it was the look in Atlas's eyes. They spoke of something more than a survivor of a harsh winter. He could feel that Atlas, though broken, had a purpose. As Cole walked into the station, he noticed Lauren Whitaker, the new vet in town, waiting by the desk. She was a recent arrival to Frost Hollow, and her arrival had been a quiet one. From what Cole had heard, she'd moved from a larger city seeking peace and the chance to heal after a past of her own. Her face was soft, but her eyes spoke of a sharp intellect, the kind that could see things others missed. Deputy Merritt, she greeted him with a gentle nod. Her voice was steady warm. "You found them in the storm, I assume?" Cole nodded, a sense of relief washing over him as he handed over the two dogs. He hadn't realized how tense his shoulders had been until now. "Yeah," he said. "They're both in bad shape. The older one's been through something. Something more than just being a stray." Lauren knelt down beside Atlas, her gloved hands moving over his coat with practiced ease. Her brow furrowed as she felt the dog's ribs, careful not to cause further pain. Atlas let out a low groan, his body stiffening, but he didn't growl or snap. Instead, his eyes followed Lauren, trusting her, despite the circumstances. Echo, still nestled close to the larger dog, whimpered softly, almost as if echoing Atlas's discomfort. "Poor thing," Lauren muttered, lifting the fur on Atlas's back and revealing more of the dog's scars. Some were old, others fresh, but all of them looked too deliberate, too surgical. She gently traced her fingers along one of the scars, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. These aren't just injuries from the streets. These were done with precision. Cole watched her work, his mind turning over the same thought he'd had since finding Atlas. There was something deeper here, something he didn't yet understand. "You think it's from some kind of training?" Cole asked, his voice low. Lauren looked up at him, her eyes thoughtful. "It's hard to say, but it looks like Atlas was trained for something. These aren't wounds inflicted by the natural course of life. They're the result of intentional, repeated injuries. Whoever did this wanted him to suffer, to become something specific, something more than just a dog." Her words hit him harder than he expected. The idea that this dog, this living, breathing creature, had been subjected to torture in the name of training, made his stomach turn. It was a harsh reality to face, but it was also a reality that needed to be confronted. "There's more going on with him," Lauren said, standing up and moving over to Echo, gently placing a hand on the puppy's head. "And with Echo, too. I can tell they've been through a lot together." Cole nodded slowly. He had no answers yet, but it was clear that Atlas and Echo's pasts were tied together in ways he wasn't prepared for. "Do you think you can help them?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. Lauren looked back at him, a faint smile on her lips, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll do everything I can," she promised. "But we may need to dig deeper to truly understand what's going on with them. For now, I'll keep them warm and treat their wounds. But there's something here that doesn't sit right." Cole felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. He didn't know what Lauren had uncovered yet, but he knew one thing for sure. His journey with Atlas and Echo had only just begun. The wind howled outside, the storm continuing its assault on Frost Hollow. Inside the sheriff's substation, the warmth from the heater did little to chase away the cold creeping into Cole's chest. He stood in the small, dimly lit office, his eyes following Lauren as she moved about, carefully tending to Atlas and Echo. There was a quiet urgency in her movements, but also a sense of determination. Cole had hoped to find solace in the familiar routine of his job, but the weight of the two dogs, especially Atlas, had changed something in him. He wasn't just protecting them from the storm. He was beginning to feel a deeper pull, a responsibility that ran far beyond simply offering them shelter. As Lauren worked, she muttered softly to herself, her hands steady as she cleaned Echo's wounds. The little puppy winced as she moved, but the bond between the two dogs was clear. Echo instinctively sought the warmth and protection of Atlas, and Cole could see that it was more than just physical comfort. It was something deeper. Something that only animals, and maybe certain people, could truly understand. Lauren's voice broke the silence. "There's something strange about this whole situation," she said, more to herself than to Cole. He turned to face her. "What do you mean?" Her expression was focused as she gently ran a hand over Echo's small body, checking for injuries. "This puppy." She started, pausing as if weighing her words carefully. "It has a chip. A microchip, but not like any I've seen before." She reached for her medical kit and pulled out a small scanner. The beep that followed confirmed what she had suspected. "A tactical chip," she muttered almost to herself. "This is not a regular tracking chip. This one's different." Cole stepped closer, his curiosity piqued. "What does that mean?" Lauren glanced up at him, her face serious. "It means Echo was part of something. Something more than just a stray dog or a rescue. This chip, it's military grade. It's not meant for just tracking a dog. It's designed for conditioning, behavioral conditioning." Cole's mind raced. He had been wondering what kind of life Atlas and Echo had led before finding their way into his care. But this was more than he had bargained for. "You're saying they were trained?" Lauren nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing as she looked down at Atlas. "Not just trained, controlled." North Gene Biotech is known for these kinds of experiments. They've been doing research on animals for years. From what I've read and heard, they've developed advanced techniques in behavioral modification, embedding chips like this one in animals to control their instincts' responses to stimuli. It's twisted, and it's not something I ever thought I would encounter out here. Cole felt the pieces start to click together. The scars on Atlas's body, the chip in Echo, the way Atlas had instinctively protected the pup. It was all connected. But to what end? "So you think North Gene Biotech is behind all of this?" Cole asked, his voice tight. Lauren paused, running a hand over her face. "I'm not sure yet, but I have my suspicions. Echo's chip. This kind of technology, it's not something that just shows up by chance. Whoever was responsible for these dogs, they weren't just rescuing them. They were using them for something far darker." Cole could feel the weight of the truth settling in. North Gene Biotech was a name he had heard in passing. But it wasn't until now that he truly understood the depth of their operations. This wasn't just about rescuing stray dogs from the streets. It was about an organization that was willing to manipulate, control, and discard lives for the sake of their own twisted research. The more he thought about it, the more it became clear Atlas and Echo weren't just victims of the storm. They were victims of something far more sinister. And Cole wasn't about to let them become casualties in someone else's experiment. "We need to find out more," Cole said, his voice steady. "We need to know exactly what North Gene did to these dogs and why they left them behind." Lauren nodded, her face hardening with resolve. "I agree. But we need to be careful. If they're still looking for them..." Cole didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. The unspoken truth hung in the air between them. Whatever happened next, it wasn't just about saving two dogs anymore. It was about uncovering a conspiracy and bringing the people responsible to justice. The silence in the substation was deafening. Cole stood by the desk, his mind racing as he processed everything Lauren had said. Atlas and Echo were more than just victims of the storm. They were victims of a dark, hidden experiment. The thought sent a chill down his spine. How could an organization like North Gene Biotech do this to animals, turning them into tools for their twisted purposes? Lauren, standing beside Atlas, was still studying the scars on the dog's body. Her brow was furrowed in concentration as she ran her fingers gently over the deep, faded lines that marked the dog's back, neck, and shoulders. They were so precise, too clean and deliberate to be the result of a stray's rough life on the streets. The scars were more than physical. They were a roadmap of a past that Atlas couldn't speak about. "This isn't just a survival story," Lauren said quietly, almost to herself. "These aren't the kinds of injuries that come from living on the streets. These are the kinds of wounds you get in training." Cole walked over, standing beside her. He watched the way Lauren traced the lines of scar tissue, her fingers moving delicately, almost reverently over the wounds. "Training? You mean like military training?" Lauren's eyes met his. "Yes, exactly. These scars look like surgical stitches, but not the kind of stitches any vet would use. The precision here." She trailed off, shaking her head as she sat back on her heels. "This is military-grade stitching. Tactical. He's been trained." Cole felt his stomach tighten. "Are you saying Atlas was part of some sort of military program?" Lauren nodded slowly. The patterns of the scars, each one clean, methodical. It's the kind of thing you'd see in a combat dog training program. North Gene Biotech is known for running these kinds of operations, using animals in behavioral experiments, conditioning them for specific purposes. These dogs weren't just abandoned. They were discarded after their training was done. Cole's mind reeled. If Atlas had been trained for military purposes, what kind of mission had he been a part of? Why was he left behind, and why had they tried to erase the dog's past so thoroughly? "I can't imagine the kind of life he's led." Cole muttered, his voice low with disbelief. To be turned into a weapon, to be used for something, and then just discarded like that. Lauren stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees, her expression darkening. "It's worse than that. These aren't just trained attack dogs. North Gene specializes in behavior modification, making the dogs think that protecting their handlers, protecting the people they're assigned to is all that matters. It's all they're trained to do. And that's where Echo comes in. He's probably the result of that same training." Cole turned his gaze toward the small puppy who was still nestled next to Atlas, looking up with wide, trusting eyes. Echo was so young, so innocent. How had he gotten mixed up in all this? "Do you think Echo was also part of this program?" Cole asked. Lauren hesitated, then nodded. "It's likely. The chip I found in Echo's neck, combined with the way Atlas is protecting him, tells me everything I need to know. This puppy is probably a part of the same military training experiment, just at an earlier stage. He hasn't been conditioned as much, but Atlas has been. His protector, his guide. Echo probably doesn't even realize what he's been trained for." Cole rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the truth pressing down on him. There were so many questions and so few answers. Atlas had been used as a tool for violence, turned into a weapon. And now he was here in Frost Hollow with a young puppy at his side, both of them scarred by a past they couldn't escape. "I don't know where to go from here," Cole admitted, his voice rough. "But I can't just walk away from this. We need to find out who did this to them. We need to find out why." Lauren stood silently for a moment, then spoke with quiet resolve. "We'll find the answers, Cole. But we need to be careful. North Gene Biotech won't let this go easily. They'll come after them after us if they think we're getting too close." Cole nodded, his determination hardening. He had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was clear: Atlas and Echo were more than just victims of a storm. They were survivors of something far worse. and no matter what it took, Cole was going to help them find peace. Despite the heavy snowstorm outside, the substation had warmed up the heater humming steadily in the corner of the room. Inside, Cole sat at the desk, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. But his thoughts were far from the comfort of the warmth. Instead, they were fixated on Atlas, who lay on a wool blanket in the corner. His eyes half closed, but his body still tense with a protective stance. Cole couldn't shake the image of the German shepherd. The scars, the exhaustion, the way Atlas had instinctively shielded Echo from harm. Even now, Atlas's paw rested over the tiny puppy, a gesture of unwavering loyalty, as though the larger dog was still watching over him, keeping him safe. There was something about Atlas's resolve that made Cole pause. He'd seen dogs before working K9's military dogs, but Atlas was different. His will to protect Echo, despite the condition he was in, was beyond what most could comprehend. In the quiet of the room, Cole's mind wandered back to Nora, the way she had always been there for him, her love, steady, a constant in his life. He remembered the night before the accident, when she had looked at him with such certainty, telling him that no matter what, she would always be there to support him. That night, they had sat in their small kitchen, sharing stories of the past, of things they dreamed of doing. And just like that, she was gone. Now, as Cole watched Atlas, he realized the same loyalty that Nora had shown him was alive in the dog. Atlas wasn't just a survivor. He was a protector, a warrior with an undying sense of duty, despite everything he had suffered. It was clear now. Atlas's heart, like his, carried the weight of loss, but the dog had something Cole didn't. Atlas's love wasn't tainted by bitterness. His love was pure, unshakable, even when everything else seemed lost. "Look at you," Cole muttered softly, his voice rough with emotion. "You're still fighting. After everything they put you through, you're still fighting." He watched the way Atlas's amber eyes flicked toward Echo, the puppy curled up beside him. Atlas's gaze softened slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the bond between them. Even though Echo was small, fragile, and had barely known the world outside the storm, Atlas had taken on the responsibility of protecting him, guiding him through the harshest of environments. The loyalty in that moment was staggering. It was the kind of loyalty that made Cole wonder, where did it come from? How could a creature so deeply scarred still give so much of himself to someone else? In a way, Atlas reminded him of Nora, someone who had given everything, even in the face of death, to protect those they loved. The thought of it made Cole's chest tighten. It was a painful reminder of what he had lost. But it was also a moment of realization Atlas's journey wasn't over, just like his own. As if sensing Cole's gaze, Atlas shifted slightly, his head lifting to meet Cole's eyes. There was a deep understanding in those eyes, as if Atlas knew what Cole was thinking. Knew that this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about finding a purpose again. Just as Nora had helped him find his purpose in the most difficult times, Atlas was now helping Cole find his. The storm raged outside, but inside there was a stillness, a moment of connection between man and dog. A shared understanding of loss, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty. "You're not alone, Atlas," Cole whispered, feeling the weight of the words sink in. "I won't let you face this alone." The puppy stirred its small form, shifting in the warmth of the blanket. Echo's eyes fluttered open, and he instinctively crawled closer to Atlas, seeking the comfort and protection only the older dog could provide. The two of them, scarred and broken, were a pair unlike any other. But in that moment, with the storm outside and the quiet of the substation wrapping around them, Cole knew they were not just survivors. They were fighters, just like him. The wind howled outside, pressing against the walls of the sheriff's substation as if it too were eager to get inside. The storm had only grown worse, and with it the tension inside the small, dimly lit room. Cole Merritt sat at his desk, his eyes on the dogs lying on the blanket. Atlas, despite his exhaustion, had his head lifted slightly, watching him with those knowing amber eyes. Echo, curled up beside him, was still a small ball of warmth and innocence. But even in the peace of the moment, something was off. Cole could feel it in his gut. The unease that had settled over him earlier had only deepened. It was only a matter of time before someone came looking for Atlas and Echo. Someone who wouldn't care about the storm, the injury, or the fact that they were living beings with stories and scars. The sound of tires crunching through the snow broke the silence. Cole's eyes narrowed as he stood up from his desk, walking to the window. Through the swirling snow, he saw a sleek black sedan pull into the parking lot. The car was too polished, too out of place for a town like Frost Hollow. The figure who stepped out of the vehicle only added to the suspicion. Victor Hale, tall and composed, stepped out into the storm with an air of authority that was impossible to ignore. He wore a long, well-tailored coat, and his face was sharp with a slight smirk that never quite reached his cold eyes. As he made his way toward the door of the substation, Cole's gut twisted. Cole didn't move as the man knocked once, then opened the door with a slow, deliberate motion. The air inside the station seemed to freeze for a moment. "Deputy Merritt, I presume?" Victor Hale's voice was smooth, calm, but there was an underlying edge to it, as if he already knew exactly how this conversation was going to go. He extended his hand, but Cole didn't take it. He didn't trust this man. Something about him felt wrong. Cole's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" Victor didn't seem to mind the cold reception. "I'm Victor Hale from North Gene Biotech. I'm here to discuss the 2 canines you found in the storm." His eyes flicked over to Atlas and Echo, both of whom were still resting. But now Cole could see the slightest hint of tension in Atlas's posture. "They're in my care now," Cole said, his voice firm, "and I'm not handing them over." Victor's expression didn't change, but the air between them seemed to tighten. "I'm afraid you misunderstand, Deputy. These dogs are not your property. They are assets of North Gene Biotech, part of a special behavioral program that we've been running for years. You found them in the storm, yes, but that does not change the fact that they belong to us." Cole stood taller, his eyes narrowing. "I'm not giving them up. Not without a damn good reason." Victor's smirk deepened, but his eyes hardened. "You don't understand, do you? These animals are valuable to North Gene. Their training, their conditioning, it's not something you can just walk away from. They are property, Deputy. And the longer you hold on to them, the more complicated this will become for you." Cole's fists clenched. His heart was racing, but his voice stayed steady. "You think you can come in here and just take them? These dogs have been through hell. I'm not going to let you drag them back into whatever hell you've been putting them through." Victor stepped closer, his eyes locking onto Cole's with a cold intensity. "I'm not asking for permission, Deputy. I'm telling you." The tension in the room was palpable. Echo stirred slightly, sensing the change in the atmosphere. Atlas, though weak, lifted his head again, his amber eyes never leaving Victor, his body tense as though ready to protect the puppy. Victor's gaze flicked from the dog to Cole, and he gave a small, amused chuckle. "This won't end well for you, Merritt. You're standing in the way of something much bigger than you realize. North Gene Biotech is far-reaching. I suggest you think carefully about your next move." Cole didn't back down. He stood his ground, locking eyes with Victor. "I don't care who you work for. Those dogs are staying with me." Victor held his gaze for a moment, then straightened his coat, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "Very well. But know this, Deputy. You're making a dangerous mistake." Without another word, Victor turned and walked out the door, leaving the substation in a tense silence. Cole stood there for a long moment, his breath slow and steady, before turning back to the dogs. The storm still raged outside. but it was the storm brewing inside his own mind that he needed to focus on now. Victor was right about one thing. This was bigger than just him and these two dogs. But Cole had already made up his mind. He wasn't going to let them go. Cole's heart was still pounding as he watched Victor Hale walk out into the storm. His footsteps echoed in the quiet substation, but the air in the room remained thick with tension. The silence that followed was broken only by the howling wind outside, but inside the weight of the encounter with Victor lingered. Cole turned back toward Atlas and Echo, who had returned to their resting spots. Atlas lay still, but his amber eyes were wide open, staring at Cole as if he could sense the danger that loomed closer. The puppy Echo was curled up close to him, the small dog still unaware of the depth of the trouble they were in. Cole moved slowly to his desk, the sound of his boots muffled by the thick layer of snow outside. He grabbed the papers that Victor had left behind. He hadn't had a chance to look at them in the heat of the moment. But now in the quiet aftermath, his mind began to pick apart the details. The documents were official-looking, filled with legal jargon and corporate seals from North Gene Biotech. But something felt off. As he scanned through the pages, he noticed discrepancies, tiny inconsistencies that set his nerves on edge. The dates didn't line up properly. The signatures seemed too clean, too perfect. And there were references to different animal assets, dogs like Atlas and Echo. But the descriptions were too vague, too impersonal. It was as though the animals weren't viewed as creatures with their own experiences, their own stories. Instead, they were merely assets, property things to be used and discarded. The more Cole read, the more a sick feeling crawled up his spine. This wasn't just about two dogs anymore. This was about something much bigger, something far more dangerous. North Gene Biotech wasn't going to let go of their assets without a fight. Cole was lost in thought when a faint noise outside caught his attention. He walked to the window, peering out into the snowstorm. The visibility was poor, but he could make out the shape of several figures moving near the edge of the parking lot just beyond the reach of the streetlights. The figures didn't seem to be just passing through. They were moving deliberately with a purpose. Cole's instincts flared. He knew it wasn't just a coincidence. His hand instinctively went to his holster. His heart rate quickened and his senses sharpened. The feeling that something was about to go wrong, something he couldn't control, was growing stronger. He reached for the radio. "Sheriff Danner, this is Deputy Merritt. We've got some activity near the station. I think we've got company." The radio crackled to life with Danner's voice. "Copy that, Merritt. I'm on my way." Cole didn't wait for the sheriff to arrive. The figures outside had disappeared from view, but he wasn't taking any chances. He grabbed his jacket, stepped out into the cold, and walked quickly toward the back entrance of the substation where he had a better view of the parking lot. The storm's howl seemed louder outside, the snow stinging his face. He squinted through the flurry, his eyes scanning the shadows, trying to make sense of what he'd seen. Then he spotted it. A faint movement near the edge of the trees, something that didn't belong. Figures in dark clothing moving with the stealth of hunters circling the substation. His hand tightened around his flashlight, and his breath formed mist in the air. These weren't random passers-by. They were here for a reason. He was sure of it now. North Gene Biotech had sent people. They were closing in. Cole moved quietly toward the back of the building, keeping low, staying out of sight. The figures were getting closer, their movements more defined in the dim light. He could hear their muffled voices, low and inaudible, but their presence was clear. Whoever they were, they didn't plan to leave until they got what they wanted. Cole's mind raced. He needed backup. Sheriff Danner was on his way, but he had no idea how many people were out there. He couldn't risk waiting. A low growl from inside the station stopped him in his tracks. Atlas, still awake, had heard something too. His protective instinct was as sharp as ever, even in his weakened state. "Stay with them," Atlas Cole murmured under his breath. He couldn't afford to make a sound. As he crouched by the back wall, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and checked the message. It was from Lauren. "They're watching us." That was all it said. Cole's stomach tightened. North Jean wasn't just sending people to take the dogs. They were watching him, watching them all. As Cole crouched low, trying to steady his breath in the cold, his mind began to wander. The noise outside had become distant, muffled by the walls of the substation, but the weight of the moment pressed down on him harder than ever. He didn't have time to wait for backup, and every second felt like an eternity. His eyes flickered back to Atlas, who was still awake, his amber eyes scanning the surroundings, his body tensed with an alertness that only came from years of training. That's when it hit Cole. The way Atlas carried himself. The dog wasn't just reacting out of instinct. It was like he knew what was coming. Like he had been trained to anticipate danger before it even showed up. Atlas's behavior wasn't just random. It was too precise, too deliberate. Cole knew that look in the dog's eyes. The same look he had seen in the eyes of soldiers trained for battle. Atlas wasn't just a survivor of the storm of the abuse and neglect he had endured. He was a survivor of something far darker. A memory surfaced in Cole's mind, one that had been buried for years, just like the pain of losing Nora. It wasn't just the storm that had shaped him. It was the past he couldn't outrun. Atlas's past had been one of control and manipulation, not freedom. He had been raised for one purpose, and one purpose only, to serve as a weapon for North Jean Biotech. Their experiments weren't just about training dogs to be obedient. No, they were far more sinister. North Jean had been perfecting methods of behavior modification to us for military and defense purposes, and Atlas had been one of their prime subjects. The experiments had started when Atlas was just a pup. He had been selected for his intelligence and physicality, and like all the others, had been subjected to advanced conditioning techniques. Every pain, every injury, every wound was carefully measured and controlled, all in the name of improving the dog's performance. They didn't just train him to obey. They trained him to be loyal to the point of sacrifice. Atlas had endured days of isolation, extreme temperatures, and forced combat simulations, all aimed at sharpening his instincts and building him into a perfect military tool. The process was relentless. The pain was constant. But the thing that haunted Atlas the most wasn't the pain. It was the betrayal. His entire purpose had been stripped away once they were done with him. When his usefulness ended, so did his value. That was when North Jean had discarded him like a broken machine. But Atlas had survived. Despite it all, he had fought back. He had fought against the conditioning that tried to turn him into nothing more than a weapon. Every scar on his body was a reminder of the battle he fought, not just to stay alive, but to retain his humanity, even in the face of extreme cruelty. Atlas wasn't just an animal anymore. He was a warrior shaped by the horrors he had survived. The memory of the past played like a series of images in Cole's mind. Atlas running through a training course, dodging obstacles with precision, fighting other dogs with military precision. He had been a machine, but his eyes had always held something more. Something that refused to be broken. It was the same thing Cole had seen in the dog when they first met, when Atlas had instinctively protected Echo despite his own injuries. Atlas had survived the worst of humanity's experiments. And now, even though his body was broken, his will remained unyielding. He was a survivor, a protector, and the bond between him and Echo had only strengthened through it all. The sharp sound of footsteps approaching outside snapped Cole out of the memory. He glanced toward the door. The figures were getting closer. The North Jean Biotech agents were coming, and they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. Cole's hand instinctively went to his sidearm. His mind was clear now, focused. He wasn't just protecting 2 dogs anymore. He was protecting Atlas's legacy. The legacy of a dog who had survived the worst and still found a reason to fight. He couldn't let that fight end here. The low, rhythmic pounding of footsteps was growing louder outside. Cole's instincts kicked in as he pressed himself against the wall, trying to quiet his breathing. The figures were drawing nearer, the weight of their presence unmistakable. He could hear the faint scrape of boots against snow, and the low hum of voices, hushed but deliberate. They were coming, and they weren't here to ask questions. Victor Hale had made it clear. He wouldn't stop until Atlas and Echo were in his possession. And now Cole understood just how far North Gene Biotech would go to reclaim what they considered their property. The urgency of the situation hit him like a bolt of lightning. He moved quickly but carefully, scanning the room for anything that could help. His eyes fell on the old supply locker in the corner of the room. It was empty except for a few spare blankets and some basic first aid supplies. But there was a small stash of equipment that could serve as a makeshift barricade if things got ugly. Cole turned back to look at Atlas and Echo. The older dog's eyes were still wide open, unblinking, watching him with that same calm, unwavering focus. Even now, injured and exhausted, Atlas was ready to protect. The puppy Echo remained curled up beside him, his small body pressed into Atlas's side for warmth. Cole's heart clenched, knowing what he had to do. He couldn't let them fall into the hands of North Gene Biotech. Not after everything they'd been through. Not after the bond they had formed, the fight Atlas had waged for his survival. Cole grabbed his radio, his fingers trembling slightly as he whispered into it. "Sheriff Danner, this is Merritt. We've got company. They're here for the dogs." The crackling silence from the radio felt like an eternity. But then Danner's voice came through low and steady. "I'm on my way. Hang tight, Merritt." Cole's grip tightened around the radio, but he didn't wait for Danner. The situation was too dire. He had to act now. He quickly grabbed the first aid kit and threw it into the back of the SUV, securing it with the spare blankets to ensure the dogs had some cushioning. Then he turned to the door, cautiously opening it just enough to peek outside. Through the storm, he could make out at least 5 figures standing near the edge of the substation's parking lot, just beyond the reach of the streetlight. They were dressed in dark clothing, their movements synchronized, military precision. Cole didn't need to wait for them to come closer. He knew exactly who they were and what they wanted. The first figure stepped into the dim light, and Cole recognized Victor Hale instantly. He had no doubt that the man was here to take what he thought was his, and Cole wasn't about to let that happen. Taking a deep breath, Cole stepped out from the shelter of the building and into the biting cold. His boots crunched against the snow and his heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was sharp-focused. There was no turning back. Victor's gaze snapped to him the moment he stepped into view. A cold smile spread across Victor's face, but there was something more calculating behind it. "Deputy Merritt, I'm afraid this isn't negotiable. You're standing in the way of a very important operation." Cole didn't flinch. "These dogs aren't yours to take," he said, his voice firm and steady. "Not anymore." Victor's smile faded, and his posture shifted, becoming more rigid, more threatening. "I was hoping you would see reason, Merritt. But now I see you're not going to make this easy." With a quick signal, the others moved forward, fanning out around the substation. Cole's heart raced as he calculated his options. He was outnumbered, but not outmatched. Before he could react, one of the figures lunged toward the door of the substation, and Atlas growled a deep, protective sound that reverberated in the still night air. The low rumble from Echo followed a tiny but determined echo of the older dog's warning. Without thinking, Cole stepped forward, drawing his weapon, his instincts guiding him more than anything else. "I said no," he shouted, his voice carrying through the howling wind. A figure raised a tranquilizer dart gun, aiming directly at Atlas. But before he could fire, Cole fired first. The shot rang out, piercing the silence of the storm, and the man dropped the dart gun, clattering against the snow. The figures hesitated for a moment, shocked by the sudden attack, but then they rushed forward, moving with military efficiency. Atlas, despite his injuries, lunged to protect Echo, positioning himself between the puppy and the intruders. Cole moved quickly, his feet crunching in the snow as he dove behind a nearby stack of equipment for cover. The cold air stung his face, but his focus was sharp. He could hear the agents moving around the substation, their footsteps drawing closer. The stakes were higher than ever, and he couldn't afford to let them win. The storm raged on the relentless wind, pushing against Cole's body as he crouched behind the stack of equipment, his heart pounding in his chest. The substation was no longer a safe haven. It had become a battlefield. Outside, the snow swirled in thick sheets, the world outside a blur of white. But inside the chaos, Cole's focus was razor-sharp. He could hear the heavy footsteps of the North Gene Biotech agents closing in. They weren't giving up, and neither could he. With Atlas and Echo counting on him, Cole knew he had no choice but to fight for their survival. "Stay low," Cole whispered to himself, tightening his grip on his weapon. The wind howled, drowning out the sounds of the approaching figures, but his instincts were sharper than ever. The storm might have been blinding, but Cole was more determined than ever to protect the dogs at all costs. Through the driving snow, Cole spotted the first figure moving toward the back entrance of the substation. Another followed both of them, flanking the perimeter. Atlas, still standing between the agents and Echo, growled low and menacingly, his body trembling with exhaustion, but the loyalty in his eyes was unwavering. Even in his weakened state, Atlas was determined to protect the puppy, just as he had done from the very beginning. The older dog was a living testament to survival, but Cole could see the toll the night had taken on him. His fur was matted with snow, and his once proud stance was now faltering, his legs shaking with each step. Despite all of that, Atlas refused to back down. His protective instincts had been honed by years of training and sacrifice. But this time, it wasn't just about obedience. It was about love. Love for Echo. Love for the bond they shared. "Come on, boy," Cole muttered, his eyes locked on Atlas as the dog lowered his body to the ground, his gaze never leaving the agents. Even though Atlas was exhausted and injured, he positioned himself once again between the agents and Echo, who was still trying to stay close to the older dog. Cole's heart tightened. He knew the dogs couldn't keep this up for much longer. The storm was too much. The conditions were too harsh. Yet despite it all, Atlas kept fighting, his body betraying him as he took slow, labored breaths. It was clear that he had given everything to protect Echo, and there was nothing left in him. But still, he fought. "I won't let you down," Cole whispered to the dog, his voice barely audible above the howling wind. The agents were getting closer, closing in from all sides. Cole had to act fast. He couldn't let the dogs face this alone. The weight of his responsibility to protect them, to honor Atlas's sacrifice, was heavy on his shoulders. In a sudden rush of movement, one of the agents lunged toward the rear door, trying to break through to the interior of the station. Without hesitation, Cole pushed off the ground and moved toward the agent, using the cover of the snowstorm to his advantage. His feet barely made a sound as he ran, and he dove behind a metal barrel, narrowly avoiding the agent's line of sight. The agent stopped scanning the area, but Cole was already behind him. With one quick, decisive action, Cole subdued him, sending the man crashing into the snow. But more were coming. There was no time to waste. Atlas, despite his exhaustion, growled again, his body shaking with effort. His gaze was still fixed on the enemy, never wavering. Echo, sensing his protector's fatigue, whimpered softly and pressed his small body against Atlas's side, seeking warmth, seeking comfort in the only family he had left. The storm had battered them both, but their bond, their unspoken promise to never leave each other, held strong. As the storm howled around them, Cole knew the next few minutes would determine their fate. If he didn't get the dogs to safety, if they didn't escape now, there might not be another chance. But Atlas wouldn't give up. Not while Echo still needed him, and not while Cole was still fighting by his side. The wind had begun to howl louder, the snow whipping around the small Frost Hollow substation, but Cole's focus was sharper than ever. The battle for Atlas and Echo was still ongoing. He had barely subdued the first agent, and now with more figures moving through the storm, the fight seemed endless. Yet something inside him, a deep, unwavering sense of duty, kept him going. The dogs, especially Atlas, depended on him, and he couldn't afford to let them down. Just as the storm began to press harder against the walls of the substation, Cole's radio crackled. He pulled it out of his pocket, his heart racing. "Deputy Merritt, we've got a situation. There's a missing child near Hollow Creek, last seen around 6 p.m. yesterday. Parents report no sign of her since last night. Search units are assembling at the ranger post." The dispatcher's voice crackled through. Cole's heart skipped a beat. He glanced over at Atlas, still standing protectively in front of Echo. The older dog's eyes never wavered, even though his body was fatigued. He had been through hell and back, but the bond between the two dogs was stronger than anything North Gene Biotech had done to them. "We're on it," Cole replied quickly, grabbing his coat and rushing toward the door. Lauren, who had been tending to the dogs, looked up at him, her expression both concerned and resolute. "I'll go with you," she said, grabbing her bag and pulling her parka tighter around her. "If Atlas is going to help, he needs a vet nearby." Cole nodded and walked to the back of the SUV, opening the door. Atlas and Echo were both alert now, the urgency in the air palpable. Cole knew that despite his injuries, Atlas could do more than just protect. He could help find the missing child. "Let's go, boy," Cole murmured as Atlas limped toward him. The older dog's movements were slow, but deliberate. Echo stayed by his side, the puppy looking up at him with unspoken trust. The two of them, despite their battered bodies, had a job to do. They arrived at Hollow Creek just as the search teams were assembling. Several volunteers in bright orange vests were gathered, their faces covered with scarves and masks to block the snow. The situation was tense, the snow piling higher by the minute, making the search all the more difficult. Cole felt his pulse quicken as he stepped out of the vehicle. But this time the need to act was stronger than fear. Atlas, sensing the urgency, was already on the move. Nose to the ground, his eyes focused as he sniffed the air. "This way," Cole said, nodding toward the trees on the far side of the creek. Atlas was already ahead of him, his gait slow but powerful, using all his remaining strength to lead the way. The dog's training, honed through countless hours of grueling work, kicked in. His nose moved swiftly, cutting through the snow as he followed the trail. The snowstorm made it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead, but Atlas was unstoppable. He pushed through the biting wind, his determination evident in each step. Lauren followed closely behind her eyes, constantly scanning Atlas, ensuring he didn't overexert himself. "Good boy, Atlas," she whispered, as the dog's nose twitched, tracking the faintest scent in the air. The puppy Echo had bounded ahead but kept close, a silent shadow trailing his protector. Cole glanced at the puppy and felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. Even in the midst of the chaos, Echo had found comfort in Atlas's strength. The bond between the two was unbreakable, forged in the fires of survival, and now in their mutual mission to protect. They moved through the snow, the storm pushing against them, but Atlas remained undeterred, his focus locked on the trail. They had to find the child. Time was running out. Minutes felt like hours, and just as Cole began to wonder if they were going the wrong way, Atlas stopped abruptly. The dog's body stiffened, his head lifted as he sniffed the air once more. Cole's heart skipped a beat. Atlas had found something. The wind howled louder, the snow falling faster. But Atlas remained steadfast, his nose to the ground, eyes focused and body taut with purpose. Every step he took was deliberate, a silent promise to the two people following him that he would lead them to the truth. Echo stayed close to the older dog, the small puppy's tail flicking nervously in the harsh weather. Yet despite the storm's fury, both dogs moved with the precision of well-trained trackers, guided by an unspoken bond that had survived much darker storms. Cole's breath came out in white clouds, freezing the air around him. His eyes darted to Lauren, who was just a few steps behind. She was keeping pace. Her brow furrowed with concern as she watched Atlas. It was clear that the older dog was struggling, his movements slower than they had been before, but there was no sign of stopping. His determination burned like a fire in the cold night, and Lauren couldn't help but admire the dog's will. "Good boy, Atlas," she whispered under her breath, as though the dog could hear her words through the storm. The snow had reached a depth that made the ground seem like one giant white blur. Echo's small form, now moving with a little more confidence, darted ahead, and then paused, looking back at Atlas as if to ensure he was still in his protective stance. Cole couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm wash over him as he watched the puppy, so small and fragile, yet already learning to trust in the protector beside him. That bond, so unbreakable and pure, reminded him of the bond he had shared with Nora. For a brief moment, the world around him seemed to vanish. The storm, the struggle, the confusion, they all faded away. Only Atlas, Echo, and the task at hand remained. They had to find the child. Time was running out. As if sensing Cole's urgency, Atlas slowed, his body stiffening in the snow. He stopped completely, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air, the faintest scent trailing on the icy wind. His amber eyes scanned the area, looking for confirmation. Cole felt his heart leap into his throat. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, barely louder than the wind. He instinctively crouched down next to Atlas, his eyes following the dog's movements. Atlas turned toward a small cluster of trees, the area just beyond a snow-covered ridge. He sniffed again, a deep, searching breath that cut through the chill. Then, with a slight twitch of his head, he began walking toward it, his steps measured and sure. Cole followed with Lauren close behind. The ground beneath their feet became uneven, and the snow grew deeper as they approached the ridge. As they reached the edge of the trees, the wind suddenly shifted, carrying a strange scent, a metallic tang mixed with something chemical. The smell was faint, but unmistakable. The trees opened up to reveal a clearing, and there, just beyond a row of broken fences, was a structure hidden by overgrown vegetation. A derelict building, its windows broken and boarded up. It looked abandoned, a forgotten relic of the past. But as they neared, the air seemed to grow colder, a sense of unease settling over them. This place doesn't feel right," Lauren whispered, her voice tinged with dread. Cole's eyes scanned the area, and a deep sense of foreboding washed over him. Atlas didn't hesitate. He led them directly to the building, his pace picking up as if drawn by something only he could sense. The puppy, though still hesitant, followed behind. As they reached the door, Cole's hand instinctively went to his weapon, but he knew the moment for caution had passed. Atlas had led them here for a reason. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the dim light revealing rows of old equipment, scattered papers, and broken crates. But it was the cages that caught Cole's attention. Several empty and rusted scattered throughout the space. They were unmistakable. Some still held old chewed-up collars, the tags barely visible. The sight made Cole's stomach churn. Lauren stepped forward, her hand hovering over a clipboard nailed to the wall. She scanned it quickly, her face paling. NGB Project 12. She read aloud, her voice shaking. Cognitive Response Test. Subject series designed to measure protective instinct reinforcement. neural stimulation applied to amygdala centers under distress stimuli. She stopped, her eyes widening in horror. They weren't just training them to fight. They were conditioning them to protect. Cole swallowed hard. Who the hell would do something like this? He turned back to Atlas, whose gaze had gone hard and focused, and to Echo, who was huddled close, sensing the shift in the air. Atlas had been trained for something brutal, something far beyond what they had imagined. But the most unsettling discovery came when Lauren picked up a small metallic object from the corner of the room. "Look at this," she said quietly, turning it over in her hands. "It's another chip. Just like Echo's." Cole's blood ran cold as he realized the truth. This wasn't just about military experiments. North Gene Biotech had been playing God, using these animals as pawns in an inhumane experiment to control loyalty and protection. And now, it was clear that Atlas and Echo had been discarded because they had outlived their usefulness. The silence in the abandoned building was suffocating. Lauren stood frozen, the small chip still in her hand, the weight of its existence heavy between them. Cole could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he absorbed the full meaning of their discovery. North Gene Biotech wasn't just conducting military experiments. They were trying to control loyalty, bending the animals to their will in ways that made his stomach turn. The dogs weren't trained soldiers. They were victims of a twisted agenda. Atlas and Echo were merely pieces in a game of control used until they no longer served a purpose. "We need to end this," Cole muttered under his breath, his voice low but resolute. He turned toward Lauren, his eyes hardening. "We need to find Victor Hale." Lauren nodded, her expression grim but determined. She knew the stakes were higher than ever. They weren't just fighting for the freedom of two dogs anymore. They were fighting against an organization that had taken lives and souls for their own experiments. The truth was far darker than they had imagined, and now it was time to confront it head-on. The storm outside had not let up, its howling winds and blinding snow still making visibility nearly impossible. But Cole knew they couldn't wait any longer. Victor Hale would not stop until Atlas and Echo were back under North Gene Biotech's control, and Cole couldn't let that happen. Together, Cole and Lauren left the derelict building, walking quickly through the snow to the SUV. Atlas and Echo were right behind them, each with a purpose. Atlas's loyalty unwavering. Echo's still uncertain, but following Atlas's lead. As they made their way to the SUV, Cole's mind raced. Victor had already made his intentions clear. The truth behind North Gene's experiments was out, but Cole knew that didn't mean the organization was finished. If anything, it meant they would stop at nothing to erase the evidence, and Cole and Lauren were now a part of that evidence. It wasn't long before they reached a secluded area deep in the forest, away from the substation and the town. The North Gene Biotech facility loomed in the distance, hidden by trees and snow. The building was cold, lifeless, but it was still a place of great power, a power they had to bring down. Victor Hale was waiting for them. He stood in front of the facility, his posture rigid and controlling. As Cole and Lauren approached, he raised a hand, his smile cold and confident. "Deputy Merritt, Dr. Whitaker." Victor greeted, his voice smooth but tinged with a menacing edge. "I thought we could avoid this confrontation, but I see you're both too stubborn for your own good." Cole stepped forward, his hand resting on his weapon. "This ends tonight, Victor. No more lies, no more experiments." Victor's eyes narrowed. "You still don't understand, do you, Merritt? These animals, these assets, are part of something much bigger than you. You're just one man, and North Gene Biotech is far more powerful than anything you can comprehend." Lauren stepped forward now, her voice steady but firm. "What you're doing is inhumane. You've used them as tools, pawns in a game of power. But we're not going to let you continue. Not anymore." Victor's expression hardened. "You should have left it alone, but now you've made it personal." His hand moved to his side, and Cole instinctively reached for his weapon. But it was too late. The sound of a gunshot rang out, and Cole ducked behind a nearby tree, his heart pounding as he checked to see if Atlas and Echo were unharmed. Victor's men had emerged from the shadows, more agents all armed and ready to fight. It was clear now. North Gene Biotech wasn't going to walk away quietly. They had come to finish what they started. The battle was on. Cole fired first, hitting one of the agents as they tried to advance. But Victor Hale wasn't done. He had other plans. "You can fight all you want," Victor shouted, his voice carrying over the storm. "But you can't stop what's already in motion." Atlas growled from behind Cole, his body still stiff but ready to fight. His eyes were locked on the agents, watching them like a hawk. Echo stood close to him, unsure but trusting in Atlas's protective instincts. The sound of gunfire and shouting filled the air. But through it all, Atlas never faltered. He moved with precision, his body instinctively protecting Echo at every turn, guarding the puppy from the chaos that raged around them. Cole's heart raced. The storm outside wasn't the only fight they were facing. The real battle was happening right here with Victor Hale and North Gene Biotech. As the gunfire continued, Cole's determination grew. He wasn't just fighting for Atlas and Echo anymore. He was fighting for something much bigger. He was fighting for the truth, for justice, and for the chance to stop North Gene Biotech from doing more damage. But the battle was far from over. The storm outside continued to howl, but inside the chaos of the battle, the wind seemed to drown out all other sounds. Cole and Lauren fought side by side, but it was clear they were outnumbered. Victor Hale and his agents pushed forward, relentless in their pursuit of the two dogs, of the assets they believed they owned. But for Cole, this wasn't just about the dogs anymore. This was personal. Every step Cole took, every shot he fired was motivated by something deeper than just the mission. It was the fight for justice, the fight for Atlas and Echo to be free from the chains that North Gene Biotech had placed around them. He couldn't let the organization win. Not after all that Atlas had done, not after the loyalty he had shown in the face of unimaginable suffering. Through the chaos, Cole barely registered the movements of Atlas. The older dog, though battered and bloodied, remained vigilant, his amber eyes never leaving the enemy. Echo, too, stayed close to Atlas, but the puppy was trembling still, learning the weight of the world on his small, fragile shoulders. Despite his fear, Echo looked to Atlas for guidance, just as Cole had once looked to Nora for support in the darkest of times. Atlas, despite his exhaustion, was still standing. The battle had taken a toll on him, but his spirit remained unbroken. He lunged forward, protecting Lauren as one of the agents made a move toward her. His body, despite being covered in injuries, acted with the precision and strength of a well-trained soldier. With a sharp growl, Atlas knocked the agent off balance, sending him sprawling into the snow. He then turned back to Cole, his focus unwavering, knowing that his job wasn't done yet. "Good boy, Atlas," Cole shouted through the wind, his voice breaking through the noise of the battle. But the dog didn't respond. His eyes were already focused on the next threat, his loyalty driving him forward, even though his body was clearly breaking down. As the battle raged on, Atlas took hit after hit, each one weakening him further. He continued to fight for Cole and Lauren, his body pushing through the pain, the blood, the exhaustion. There was no retreat for him, not while there was still a threat to his family. Finally, the battle came to an abrupt halt. Victor Hale and his agents were pushed back, retreating into the storm, leaving the substation in a tense silence. The only sound was the soft growl of Atlas, still standing still, watching the retreating figures with the same unrelenting gaze. But as Cole and Lauren made their way toward the injured dog, the reality of the situation sank in. Atlas was breathing heavily, his body trembling, his paws barely holding him up. Lauren quickly moved to his side, her hands shaking as she assessed his wounds. He's been through so much, Lauren murmured, tears welling in her eyes. She gently cleaned his wounds, but it was clear that Atlas's injuries were more than just physical. They were the result of a lifetime of abuse, of torture, and of sacrifice. Atlas had given everything to protect those he loved, and now his body was finally giving in. But even in his weakened state, Atlas lifted his head, his amber eyes meeting Cole's. There was a quiet understanding in them, a final acknowledgement of the bond they had shared. Atlas had fought for this moment, for the chance to be free. And in the end, he had sacrificed everything for those he cared about. "Thank you, boy," Cole whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You've done more than anyone could ever ask." As Lauren tended to Atlas's wounds, Cole felt the weight of the dog's loyalty settle in his chest. Atlas hadn't just protected him, he had given his very life to ensure that Echo and Cole were safe. There was no higher form of loyalty, no greater sacrifice. Cole knelt beside Atlas, running his hand gently over the dog's head. "You've earned your rest, Atlas," he murmured, "but I promise you I won't let your fight be in vain." The storm outside began to fade, the snow still falling, but the tension in the air had lifted. Atlas's sacrifice had allowed them to survive the night, to face down the enemies that had hunted them. His loyalty had ensured that Echo would have a chance to grow up free, away from the horrors that had defined his early life. But Cole knew that the fight wasn't over. North Gene Biotech wasn't done yet, and Atlas's sacrifice was only the beginning of what they would need to do to ensure justice was served. The storm had finally begun to subside, but the silence that followed felt heavier than any snowstorm. The only sounds in the room were the faint breathing of Atlas and the soft, muffled growls from Echo, who remained close, his small body nestled against the older dog's side. The wind outside, though still cold, no longer felt as oppressive as it had moments ago. The tension had lifted, but the weight of what had happened was still hanging in the air. Atlas's fight, his sacrifice, had changed everything. Cole sat next to the dog, his hand still resting gently on Atlas's head. The older dog's body was battered, his breathing shallow. But there was something in those amber eyes that spoke louder than any words could. Atlas had given everything to protect Echo, and in doing so, he had taught Cole something deeper than he could have ever imagined. As he sat there, his thoughts drifted back to his life before the storm, before the chaos had swept him into this battle for survival. There had been a time when he felt lost, when the pain of losing Nora had nearly consumed him. He had been stuck in a cycle of guilt, of remembering a life that could never be again. But in that moment, as he sat beside Atlas, he realized that the dog's unwavering loyalty, his sacrifice, had reignited something in him. The sense of purpose he had lost after Nora's death had returned. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about finding something worth fighting for again. Atlas had taught him that. In a way, Atlas had given him the strength to keep going, even when the weight of the world seemed unbearable. The dog's loyalty, his willingness to protect Echo despite his own suffering, was a reminder that there was still goodness in the world. Even in the darkest of times, there was still something worth protecting, something worth fighting for. Cole's hand trembled slightly as he continued to stroke Atlas's head. The dog's fur was matted with snow and blood, but his spirit remained untamed. Atlas had been through hell, but his loyalty to Echo, to Cole, had never wavered. Echo, who was still so young, still learning to trust the world, had found his protector in Atlas. "Thank you, boy," Cole whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You've shown me what it really means to fight to live for something bigger than yourself." The room was quiet, except for the soft sighs of Echo as he rested beside Atlas. Lauren was finishing tending to Atlas's wounds, her hands gentle as she wrapped his injured body in blankets to keep him warm. She glanced over at Cole, her eyes full of understanding. You know, Lauren began softly, Atlas's loyalty. It's not just something we see in dogs. It's something that can remind us all of the power of love and sacrifice. Sometimes it takes something as pure as that to remind us what really matters. Cole nodded slowly, taking in her words. The storm had taken so much from him, but it had also given him something back. It had given him the chance to see what Atlas and Echo had been through, what they were still fighting for. And in return, Atlas had given Cole a reason to believe again. He looked at the two dogs side by side. Atlas, though wounded, was still protecting Echo, still offering everything he had to make sure the younger dog was safe. It was the purest form of loyalty Cole had ever seen. Cole finally stood up, looking down at Atlas one last time. "You've done more than your part, Atlas," he said, his voice quiet but full of reverence. "Now it's our turn." It wasn't just about saving Echo anymore. It wasn't just about stopping North Gene Biotech. It was about something bigger. The message that Atlas had left behind: loyalty, sacrifice, and the will to keep fighting no matter the cost. As Atlas breathed softly, his body finally relaxing, Cole knew that the battle wasn't over. But he had learned something important. Even in the face of unimaginable odds, it was possible to find a reason to keep going. And that reason was worth fighting for. The snow had finally begun to soften, and with the fading storm, Frost Hollow seemed to breathe a little easier. The weight of the endless blizzards and the looming threat from North Gene Biotech had passed, leaving behind a quiet calm that settled over the town. As the last of the storm clouds parted, sunlight filtered through, casting a soft golden glow on the snow-covered streets. For the first time in what felt like forever, the town of Frost Hollow felt like it could finally heal. Cole stood at the edge of the town, looking out across the snow-dusted landscape. The changes were subtle at first, the familiar quiet of the town now carrying a sense of promise. The battle with North Gene was far from over, but there was something in the air, something that had been missing before. It wasn't just the storm passing. It was the sense of renewal, of things being put right, of a chance to rebuild, to start fresh. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind. Rescues, confrontations, revelations. But Cole knew that the hardest part was behind him. With Atlas and Echo at his side, he'd faced down the darkness. But now he had to take the lessons learned and find a way forward, not just for himself, but for the animals who needed him most. It was then that the thought struck him. Frost Hollow needed more than just a town sheriff. It needed a place of healing, a sanctuary, where animals like Atlas and Echo could find peace after years of suffering. He didn't know where the idea came from, but it felt right. The dog that had taught him the true meaning of loyalty, of sacrifice, deserved a place to finally rest. And Echo, though still young, had been through more than any puppy should bear. He deserved a future not bound by the horrors of his past. Lauren, Cole said, turning to the vet who had worked tirelessly beside him, keeping Atlas alive despite the odds. She looked up from the small medical table where she was checking Echo's vitals, a faint smile on her lips. "I've been thinking," Cole began. "We've both seen what these dogs have been through. We've seen the kind of loyalty and sacrifice they're capable of. And I think Frost Hollow could be the place where they can truly begin again." Lauren raised an eyebrow, but her expression softened. "You're not suggesting what I think you are you?" Cole nodded, his heart steady with resolve. "We need to build a canine rescue center, a place where these dogs can live without fear, without the ghosts of their past. A place where they can heal, just like the people of Frost Hollow are trying to do. And I want to be the one to help train them, give them the lives they deserve." Lauren thought for a moment, then smiled. "I think that's exactly what this town needs. I'll help. We'll make sure no more dogs have to suffer like Atlas and Echo have." Together they made plans to establish a new future for Frost Hollow. Atlas and Echo would have the first chance to live out their days in peace, and soon other dogs who had been victims of neglect and abuse would find a safe haven as well. Cole decided to become the canine trainer for the center, passing on the lessons he had learned from Atlas. Lessons about loyalty, bravery, and the power of second chances. As for Atlas and Echo, their lives were about to take a turn they never imagined. With Cole's promise, they were finally going to live the life they had always deserved. One of love, safety, and freedom. No longer would they be tools in a game of manipulation. They were now free to be themselves. The town of Frost Hollow was no longer the same. It had become a place of healing, a sanctuary for those who needed it most. And for Atlas and Echo, the future had never seemed so bright. The snow had melted, the storm had passed, and with it Frost Hollow began to take on a new life. The once quiet town now held a sense of rebirth, a freshness that permeated every corner. The streets seemed a little brighter, the air a little clearer. The change was subtle but undeniable. Cole and Lauren had taken the first steps toward creating something that would make Frost Hollow a place of healing, not just for animals, but for the people who had been touched by the same struggles and pains. Lauren had spent weeks working on the plans for a new canine rescue and therapy center, a place where injured, abused, and abandoned animals could find sanctuary and recovery. It was more than just a place for dogs. It was a sanctuary for those seeking redemption. And it wasn't just about the animals. It was about the people, too. As they worked tirelessly to bring the center to life, the town began to rally around them. Frost Hollow wasn't the same place it had been before. The town had come together in a way Cole had never imagined, unified by the desire to help and heal. The idea that they could give Atlas and Echo two souls who had suffered for so long a chance to live without fear and pain inspired others. The day the K9 Rescue Center officially opened, it felt like the entire town had gathered in celebration. There was a sense of pride that hung in the air, a shared understanding that they were part of something bigger than themselves. Cole and Lauren had done more than just save two dogs. They had brought a community together. Atlas and Echo were the first two residents, their recovery symbolizing hope and the power of second chances. Atlas, though still bearing the marks of his painful past, was finally able to relax, to let go of the constant vigilance that had kept him on edge for so long. Echo, once a small, trembling puppy, had grown stronger, his tail wagging with a joy that had once seemed impossible. Together they became the heart of the center. Atlas's journey from soldier to protector had come full circle, and now he was a living testament to the resilience of the spirit. And Echo, the little puppy who had known only fear and cold, was finally experiencing what it meant to be loved and safe. But their recovery wasn't just about healing from the physical scars. It was about reconnecting with the world around them. Atlas had once been a product of North Gene Biotech's inhumane experiments trained for violence and control. But now, in the warmth of the center, he had become a symbol of peace, teaching the other dogs, and the people who came to visit, the power of unconditional love and trust. As Cole watched Atlas and Echo together, he saw a reflection of his own journey. Both the dogs and the town had suffered. They had all been through something dark and painful, but now they were finding their way back to the light. The healing process was slow, but it was there. Lauren had designed the center not only as a place for the dogs to recover physically, but as a place for emotional healing as well. People came from all over to volunteer, and soon the center became a refuge, not just for animals, but for people who had lost their way. Many found comfort in the presence of the dogs, and some even began to open up about their own struggles, finding the courage to heal alongside their four-legged companions. The center became a living, breathing example of the power of recovery, and Cole knew that they were just getting started. Atlas and Echo were only the beginning. It had been months since the K9 Rescue and Therapy Center had opened, and the changes in Frost Hollow were undeniable. The air felt different, warmer, filled with the hope of second chances, not just for Atlas and Echo, but for everyone who walked through the center's doors. The dogs, once broken by cruelty and neglect, were beginning to flourish, and the community that had gathered around them seemed to heal in tandem. But for Cole, the work wasn't finished. He had promised to help the dogs find their purpose again, and now it was time to fulfill that promise. Atlas had already taught him more about loyalty, sacrifice, and courage than he could have ever imagined. But now it was time to share those lessons with the next generation of dogs. Cole stood in the training yard, his gaze sweeping across the group of young K9s that stood in front of him. They were eager, their eyes bright with curiosity and energy. Some of them had been abandoned like Atlas, and Echo. Others had been rescued from shelters or were brought in by families who could no longer care for them. Regardless of their pasts, they all had one thing in common. They were now a part of the center's future. He smiled, stepping forward. "All right, you guys, ready?" he asked, his voice steady but warm. The dogs wagged their tails in unison, the eagerness in their stance unmistakable. The training process had to be different for each one of them. Some of the dogs were naturally more cautious, more reserved, while others were full of energy and excitement. But Cole knew that each one had a unique set of strengths, and he was determined to help them harness those strengths. As he began their first session, he focused not just on obedience or skill, but on something more important: connection. Just as Atlas had taught him, loyalty and love had to come first. Without trust and love, no amount of training could truly make a K9 effective. They had to trust their handlers just as they had to trust each other. "Focus on your partner," Cole instructed the group, pointing to one of the dogs. "Don't just follow orders. Work together." He watched as the dogs moved into position, learning to communicate and bond with one another. It wasn't just about the commands anymore. It was about the connection between them and their handlers, and between the dogs themselves. For Cole, this moment felt like a turning point. These dogs weren't just weapons or tools. They were warriors, yes, but they were also friends. And they were teaching him as much as he was teaching them. He moved between them, offering encouragement, praise, and the occasional correction. It was a delicate balance, just like the one he had with Atlas and Echo. They weren't just animals to him. They were family. As the training continued, Cole saw the same loyalty in the young dogs that he had seen in Atlas. They weren't just learning to fight or obey. They were learning to love, to protect, and to bond. Some dogs, like Kaiser, a German Shepherd mix, moved with the precision of a trained soldier. Others, like Rex, a smaller but fiercely determined terrier, showed a raw energy that Cole knew he could refine into something special. At the end of the day, when the training session was over, Cole sat down with the group, watching the dogs settle around him, tired but content. The bond between them was evident even in their exhaustion. They were no longer just a team. They were becoming a family. Cole looked around at the dogs. Atlas, now standing proudly by his side, and Echo, who had grown into a strong, confident pup. He realized that these dogs, these warriors, were part of something bigger. They weren't just fighters. They were protectors, companions, and most importantly, they were reminders of the healing power of loyalty, sacrifice, and love. He stood up and looked out over the training field, a deep sense of peace washing over him. Frost Hollow had given him a second chance, and now it was giving Atlas, Echo, and the other dogs a second chance too. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more battles, and more healing to come. But Cole knew one thing for sure: with the loyalty of these dogs by his side, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. The sun had finally broken through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the K9 Rescue and Therapy Center that had become a symbol of hope for Frost Hollow. It was a place where healing had begun, not just for the animals, but for the people who had come to love and care for them. Cole, Lauren, Atlas, and Echo stood together at the heart of it all, their journey from pain to peace, now complete. The center had grown over the past months, with more dogs being rescued from abusive situations, more volunteers offering their time, and more families finding comfort in the presence of these incredible animals. It wasn't just a place for rehabilitation. It was a community, a home where people and animals could find a second chance. Atlas stood tall beside Cole, his once battered body now healed and his spirit stronger than ever. Echo, still full of energy, but with a newfound confidence, bounded around them, chasing after a ball that had been thrown into the air. The two dogs were inseparable, their bond a testament to the power of loyalty and love. They were no longer victims of their past. They were protectors, companions, and symbols of resilience. Lauren stood beside Cole, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. They had worked side by side to bring this dream to life, and now, as she watched the dogs play and the volunteers work together, a sense of pride filled her heart. "We did it," she said softly, her voice full of satisfaction. "Look at how far we've come." Cole nodded, his gaze following Atlas and Echo as they frolicked in the yard. The path to get here had been long and filled with obstacles, but the rewards were more than worth the struggle. He could see the difference in the dogs. He could see the change in the town. Frost Hollow wasn't just a place anymore. It had become a beacon of hope, a place where second chances were given not just to the animals, but to the people as well. "Yeah, we did," Cole replied, his voice thick with emotion. He turned to look at Lauren, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you." Lauren smiled, the warmth of the moment matching the warmth in her heart. "We're a team, Cole. You, me, the dogs. We're all in this together." As Cole looked around at the bustling center, he realized that this was the peace he had been searching for. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't just about fighting for what was right. It was about healing, rebuilding, and finding purpose once again. Atlas trotted over to Cole, his tail wagging as if to say, "We're home." Echo followed closely behind, giving Cole a playful nudge with his nose. It was a simple gesture, but it was a reminder of everything they had been through and everything they had fought for. The storm had passed both literally and figuratively. Frost Hollow had weathered its trials, and so had the people and the animals within it. They had found peace in their journey. And though they had been tested in ways most would never understand, they had emerged stronger, more united. The message was clear. No matter how dark the past, no matter how difficult the path, loyalty, love, and sacrifice would always lead the way toward hope. Atlas and Echo were living proof of that. Their bond, their strength, and their unwavering loyalty had brought Cole, Lauren, and the entire town of Frost Hollow back from the brink. In the quiet of the afternoon, as the sun bathed the rescue center in golden light, Cole stood at the edge of the yard, looking out at the horizon. There was still much work to be done, many more dogs to save, and many more people to help. But for the first time in a long time, Cole felt at peace. The journey ahead would be long, but with Atlas, Echo, and Lauren by his side, he knew that the road was worth it. The story of Atlas and Echo is more than just a tale of survival. It's a reminder of the transformative power of love, loyalty, and sacrifice. Atlas, the German shepherd who once endured unimaginable pain, became a symbol of unwavering commitment, teaching us that no matter how broken we may seem, we can still protect love and fight for those who need us most. His story is a testament to the incredible resilience of dogs, who, despite being subjected to cruelty, never lose their capacity for love and loyalty. The bond between Atlas and Echo is a living example of how animals can change our lives in profound ways. The love and protection they share despite their troubled past reflect the deep connection animals and humans can form when trust and care are allowed to grow. Echo, once lost and scared, found in Atlas not just a protector, but a family. A reminder that love, even in its purest form, is a force strong enough to heal even the deepest wounds. Through this journey, we learn that love for animals, especially dogs like German shepherds, is not just about companionship. It's about the lessons they teach us, the importance of loyalty, the power of sacrifice, and the courage to move forward, no matter the obstacles. These dogs give us more than we could ever give in return. They show us what it means to truly live for something beyond ourselves. And in doing so, they help us rediscover our own capacity for kindness, resilience, and hope. As we look toward the future, the message is clear. Love and loyalty are not just qualities we should admire. They are values that can change the world. And in the eyes of dogs like Atlas and Echo, we find not only the hope for a better tomorrow, but the inspiration to make it happen.